What the artists inspire? I mean, I'm basically inspired every week by the studio visits I make. So many artists are inspiring me, and that's why I started to do this conversation project, where I also record conversations with artists. So yes, I would say many artists inspire me. I mean, one of the first artists I met when I was a teenager are the Swiss artists Peter Fischli and David Weiss, and they have filmed The Way Things Go with the endless chain reaction. It was kind of like a revelation for me when I was 17, and to see that in the studio, to see this never-ending chain reaction they were filming with Pio Corradi as the DP was really a sort of a founding experience. I would also say to me, Gerhard Richter, when I was 17, 18, the painter in his studio in Cologne, and the way how Gerhard Richter kind of kept reinventing painting again and again has been a big inspiration. But I would say also a lot of inspiration comes from different other art forms. I think sometimes we can be inspired by what is maybe least expected. We can be inspired in an unexpected way. So I've been inspired by urbanists, I've been inspired by scientists, I've been inspired by philosophers, poets, and certainly one of the main inspirations for me has been was the philosopher and poet from Martinique, Edouard Glissant, whom I've had conversations with many times, and who somehow, more than anyone else, made me understand the world we're living in, and made me understand also almost like a toolbox. His sort of books and thinking became a toolbox for me every day. So when I wake up in the morning, I usually read 10 or 15 minutes of Edouard Glissant to start the day. So I would say he's been a big inspiration, yeah. Yes, I mean, exhibitions are important in my life because it's part of what I do. I'm an exhibition maker, I organize exhibitions. When I grew up in Switzerland, there was this exhibition at the Kunsthaus in Zurich. I was a teenager when I went to see it. It was called Der Hang zum Gesamtkunstwerk. It's sort of the tendency towards the total work of art. It was curated by the legendary curator Harald Seemann. And it looked at this idea, not an isolated art form, but sort of artists who bring all the arts together. And in this exhibition, you found, of course, an artist like Joseph Beuys and his idea of social sculpture. We went further back, you would find the color theory of Runge, you would find the anthropos of Rudolf Steiner, you would find Schwitters Merzbau, you would find Emma Kunz, the healer. So in a way, I would say the Hang zum Gesamtkunstwerk was the exhibition I visited most, because I went there probably 30 or 35 times. Whenever I could sort of get out of school early enough in the afternoons, I would go to Zurich, and I would go to the Kunsthaus every weekend. I would visit the exhibition. It's almost like when you learn a poem by heart. I kind of learned this exhibition by heart. So I would say that's it. It's really this one exhibition. Of course, this idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, also this sort of connection it has to Utopia, has been inspiring for all the work I did afterwards. Gerhard Richter, when I visited him first, this very early studio visit I made with him, told me that art is the highest form of hope. And I kind of think about that every day. For me, that's what art is. And that's also why I kind of get out of bed in the morning, because I think by doing exhibitions, we can hopefully give hope to the world. So yes, so the kind of question of the unrealized, but it's kind of very meta, yes. We are back to the meta. I mean, it's obviously very meta that I answer my own questions here. I said the only thing which would be more meta than that would actually be the photographer of the event. It seems would actually make his own photo, a self-portrait. That would be the only thing which would be even more meta. But anyway, that's a footnote. So the idea of meta, because it's obviously meta, because the question of the unrealized project is the question I ask in all my conversations with artists, because I think we know a great deal about architects' unrealized projects because they kind of publish them. It's part of the architectural world that competitions happen, and then architects publish often lost competition entries, and then it creates awareness, and then sometimes it helps actually that they're getting built. But in the art world, we know very little about visual artists' unrealized projects. Even the most well-known artists, we don't know about the unrealized projects. We know very little about poets or novelists' unrealized projects, filmmakers' unrealized projects. So I always thought it's an interesting question, because we can actually then hopefully by talking about it enable and help that these unrealized projects or unrealized dreams can become realized. It's not about keeping them unrealized. It's about getting them out there in the world. Now, to cut the long story short, my unrealized project is ironically to one day do a big exhibition of the thousands of unrealized projects I've archived through my ongoing research into unrealized projects, and I have a huge database of many amazing artist projects and projects of artists from all art forms which haven't happened. And I always thought it would be amazing. There was the Crystal Palace, of course, in the 19th century. Then Cedric Price in the 20th century wanted to do the Fun Palace with John Littlewood. I always thought one could sort of do a palace of unbuilt roads, a building where people could see all these unrealized projects, and maybe the awareness of that could also almost like be an agency. That is, it wouldn't just be like passive, it would be like active, that the agency could then help, that these unrealized artist dreams could somehow be realized in the world. So that's an unrealized project. The other unrealized project is that I've always thought that the world needs a new Black Mountain College. I think we actually need an interdisciplinary kind of art school which goes beyond the fear of pooling knowledge and connects art, science, technology, all the different art forms, and that is something which has been an unrealized project for a long time. But maybe we should stick to the first answer, because that second project we are now working actually with Laureen Powell-Jobs, because she basically saved this school in San Francisco, the San Francisco Art Institute, and we're working on that with Abby Church to actually make that happen. So in that sense, it's not appropriate as an answer, because it's actually about to be realized. We're going to do it. Whilst the project about the unrealized project is indeed still unrealized. And the irony is that whenever we want to do this big project about the unrealized project, something goes wrong, and then the funding or with the space. So it's almost like a weird thing that this unrealized project remains unrealized. But one day, I'm going to do it. I also have an unrealized project to one day do an exhibition with David Hammonds. He's very reluctant, to do museum shows, and so that's an artist I always wanted to work with. We've done a small exhibition in Belgium, but we've never done like a bigger museum show. So do a project with him at the Serpentine has always been an unrealized project. And I have to maybe explain the sort of scope or the range of the unrealized projects. Obviously, there are lots of different unrealized projects I've archived. Some projects are too big to be realized. They are also sometimes too small to be realized. For example, Sildo Meirelles wanted to show this tiny little cube in a museum, which otherwise would have to be completely empty. So it took him many years to convince the museum to actually do it. So that project was too small to be realized. Then you have obviously got projects which are unrealized because they are too time intense. That goes beyond the time of a lifetime. Some projects are forgotten projects in the analog world, maybe in a locker, in the studio, or in a shelf, or something. In the digital world, maybe it's a file in our computer. It's a forgotten project. It can also be that it's utopic, that it's fully or partially unrealizable. Sia Marjani wanted to connect the Earth and the Moon with a sculpture. That somehow was an unrealizable project. So other projects, I would say, do not happen because of censorship. That's also a reason why many projects don't happen. Sometimes it is, commissions which fall through. But then also Doris Lessing, the late Doris Lessing, always told me there is also basically a sort of a category of projects which don't happen because we don't dare to do them. So she would call those the self-censor project. I always wanted to write a novel, and I thought it would be like really embarrassing, so I haven't done it. So that's an example of a self-censor project. I've always been listening, and I'm listening more than ever, to Hildegard von Bingen. Yeah, when I wake up in the morning, I often read some Edouard Glissant. I read some of his poems. I read some of his texts. That's almost like a ritual. I always begin the day also actually by making a cyber introduction. I think for me as a curator, it's about bringing artworks together. It's about junction making. I connect artworks. I bring worlds together. Not only artworks, it's about bringing worlds together, but it's also about bringing people together. So I often begin the day by introducing two people who have never met each other. So that's another form of junction making. So I would say that I don't have a collection. I have an archive. A quite big archive, and of course there's it's an archive of many books, but also at the center of this archive are more than 4,000 conversations. It's a very big data set, which is mostly digital. I'm very, very grateful to the late Jonas Mekas, the visionary filmmaker, because when I was very young, I was kind of in my late teens, early 20s, we sat in a cafe in Paris, and he said, you meet all these extraordinary artists, and one day you're going to really regret if you don't somehow document it. So I said, yes, do you want me to record the audio? He said, no, 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 I want you to film it. And obviously, at that time, that's before the time when everybody had a camera on their phone. So it wasn't like completely obvious to do that, but it was really his encouragement. I then bought a small film camera. And I would say today there's probably about 2,000 hours in my archive of film, maybe 2,000 hours are audio. I would say that's maybe my biggest collection / archive. It's conversations. And very often I also talk to the same artists again and again. I was very inspired by David Sylvester's book on Francis Bacon, and probably, basically the critic David Sylvester, the writer, kind of had many, many conversations with David Sylvester again and again and again. And so in my archive, very often you would find 10, 20, 30 conversations with the same artists over many years, which is why I'm also doing books of these repeat conversations. I think the artist I've interviewed most is the poet Estelle Adnan, who's also an amazing painter and visual artist and architect, really a completely interdisciplinary artist. And I've had, I think, 56 conversations with her. Trains. I've always had most ideas on trains, and when I began as a teenager to travel in Europe and go to studios, I had no money, and so basically the only way to do these trips was through an Interrail ticket. One could buy these, as a teenager, these tickets very cheaply to travel all over Europe, and I couldn't afford hotels, so I would always spend the night on a train. So I would basically go to a city, I would make studio visits, I would take the night train, go to the next city, make studio visits, and would do that for a month or more in summer. And so I really got used to this sort of rhythm of trains. And still today, when I'm on trains, I have the best ideas. Then the other place where I always had ideas is the Engadin in Switzerland. There is this valley. I grew up in Switzerland. And there's this valley in Switzerland which is almost on 2,000 meters altitude, St. Moritz. I did one of my first exhibitions there with Gerhard Richter in Sils Maria. And it's very strange that something seems to happen to the brain in this valley, that as soon as I'm there, I'm having ideas. And I'm not the only one to whom that has happened. Many artists over time have gone there and have spent time. So yes, I would say night trains, and the Engadin. Yeah, I think, Pauline Oliveros taught me about this idea of deep listening, and I think it's a super important thing for our time, is to learn to listen again. And obviously, my whole conversation project, is based on that. So yeah, it's very central in what I do. Yeah. But there's so many things. It's definitely I buy a book every day, and I couldn't, live without books. I also couldn't live without matcha.